In the quiet farmlands of Nebraska, Thomas Miller spent 40 years building a life with Sarah, never knowing his wife carried a secret that could shake nations. Now, as he buries her treasured locket beneath their favorite oak tree, dark figures watch from the shadows. By sunrise, U.S. Navy officers will arrive with classified orders, transforming his grief into a desperate race against time. Sarah wasn't just a farmer's wife. She was one of America's most brilliant codebreakers, and her final message could prevent an international catastrophe. But something doesn't add up. Why are foreign agents circling his land? What's hidden inside that locket? And most importantly, why did Sarah choose to bury her secret here of all places? Before we dive deeper into this story, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn air bit through Thomas Miller's jacket as he made his way across the darkened farm. His boots left deep impressions in the frost-kissed grass, each step heavy with purpose and grief. The old oak tree loomed ahead, its bare branches reaching toward a sky still hours shy of dawn. In his pocket, Sarah's locket seemed to pulse with an unnatural weight. He'd given it to her on their 30th anniversary, never questioning why she wore it every day without fail, never wondering about the way she'd touch it unconsciously during their evening news broadcasts, especially when stories about naval operations came on. Just a nervous habit, she'd always said, smiling that gentle smile that could make him forget any worry. But her last words had been different. "The oak tree, Tom. It has to be the oak tree, promise me." He pulled out the folded farm map she'd left in her bedside drawer. Even in the beam of his flashlight, her pencil markings were barely visible, strange angles and numbers that meant nothing to him. She'd been different those final weeks, spending hours at her desk, writing in that old garden journal she'd kept for decades. The shovel bit into earth that had known his touch for 40 years. Each strike echoed across the silent farm, and more than once, Thomas could have sworn he heard the crunch of tires on gravel, the whisper of footsteps in tall grass. But whenever he paused to listen, there was only the wind and the distant cry of night birds. 3 feet down, he struck something solid. For a moment, his heart stopped, but it was only the old concrete marker Sarah had insisted on placing here years ago. "For the roots," she'd said. "They'll need the anchor when the storms come." He'd taken her meaning literally then. Now, like so many things, it carried a different weight. The locket caught the flashlight's beam as he withdrew it one last time. Gold and simple. It had always suited Sarah. She'd never been one for flash, his codebreaker wife. The thought almost made him laugh. How strange those words felt, how impossible. "I chose you," she'd whispered, tubes and monitors painting her hospital room in artificial constellations. "Every day for 40 years, I chose you. Remember that when they come. Remember that I chose you, even when I couldn't choose to tell you everything." He placed the locket in a small metal box, another of Sarah's specific instructions, and buried it carefully beside the marker. As he worked, memories surfaced like bubbles in still water. Sarah teaching him to dance in their kitchen. Sarah reading intelligence briefings disguised as garden catalogues. Sarah kissing him goodbye every morning as if it might be the last time. How many of those memories needed to be rewritten now? How many quiet moments had been charged with meanings? He couldn't see. The earth accepted his offering without comment. Thomas packed it down firmly, then scattered a handful of oak leaves over the disturbed soil. Standing back, he could hardly tell anything had changed. But everything had changed, hadn't it? Even the air felt different, charged with something he couldn't name. He checked his watch. 4:47 a.m. Sarah's final note had said they would come at dawn, whoever they were. As if in answer, a flash of movement caught his eye, there, at the edge of the cornfield, then another by the old barn. The shadows were moving now, taking shape, becoming men with purpose. Thomas straightened his back. feeling every one of his 68 years. The farm map crinkled in his pocket as he turned toward the house. Sarah had left him other instructions, other papers, a key to a lock he'd never known existed. Dawn was coming, and with it, the answer to a question he'd never thought to ask. Who was Sarah Miller, really? And what had she buried here in the heart of their life together that was worth dying to protect? He took one last look at the oak tree, its branches, now stirring with more than just wind. "I chose you too, Sarah," he whispered, "every day, even now." Then he walked toward the house, leaving footprints that would soon be joined by others, as the last quiet morning of his old life faded into history. The first hint of sunrise had barely touched the horizon when Thomas heard the vehicles approaching. Not the usual rattling pickup trucks of his farming neighbors, but the steady, purposeful hum of military engines. He stood at his kitchen window, coffee cooling forgotten in his hands, and watched 3 black SUVs pull up in perfect formation. Men in dark uniforms emerged, moving with practiced efficiency. At their center walked a woman whose bearing marked her as their leader, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had earned its gravity through years of difficult decisions. The knock at his door was crisp, authoritative. Thomas took his time answering it. "Mr. Miller?" The woman held up a badge that gleamed in the dawn light. "Commander Alexandra Ellis, U.S. Naval Intelligence. We need to discuss your wife." Thomas studied the badge, the eagle and anchor insignia, the security clearance markers he'd never learned to read, but Sarah would have understood instantly. "My wife was a gardener," he said quietly. "She died 3 weeks ago." Commander Ellis's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Your wife was a lot of things, Mr. Miller. A gardener, yes, a beloved wife, certainly, and one of the most brilliant cryptanalysts the Navy has ever known." The words hung in the morning air like fog. Behind Ellis, her team was already spreading. Out across the property, their movements precise and practiced. One of them spoke quietly into a radio, gesturing toward the oak tree. "You're too late," Thomas said. "I already buried it." Ellis's eyebrows lifted slightly. "The locket! We know. We've been watching since midnight. The question is, did you follow her instructions exactly?" The coffee mug nearly slipped from Thomas's grip. "You were watching, and you didn't stop me." Sarah's orders. She was very specific about how this needed to play out. Ellis glanced at her watch. "May we come in, Mr. Miller? What I'm about to tell you can't be said out here." Thomas stepped aside, allowing Ellis and 2 of her officers to enter. They moved through his home with the strange familiarity of people who'd studied floor plans, who knew every corner and shadow before they'd ever set foot inside. In his living room, Ellis removed a thick manila envelope from her briefcase. "Your wife left this for you, to be delivered only after the locket was secured. But before you read it, I need you to understand something." She met his eyes directly. Sarah wasn't just any analyst. She was part of Project Starfish, a top-secret program tracking submarine movements across the globe. 3 days ago, one of our most advanced submarines went silent in contested waters. We believe Sarah left us the key to finding it. In a locket? Thomas sank into his armchair, Sarah's favorite quilt still draped across its back. "In a locket," Ellis confirmed. "That contains microfilm with information vital to national security. Information that other parties would kill to obtain." She paused, letting that sink in. "Are you sure you followed her burial instructions precisely?" Thomas thought of the metal box, the concrete marker, the exact depth. "Yes." "Good. Because Sarah believed someone inside naval intelligence has been compromised. That's why she chose this location, chose you, because no one would suspect." Ellis trailed off as one of her officers burst in. "Commander, movement at the perimeter. 3 vehicles approaching from the south." Ellis was instantly alert. "Local plates, foreign diplomatic. All ready?" Ellis checked her watch again. "They're ahead of schedule. Mr. Miller, I need you to come with us. Now." But Thomas didn't move. He was looking at the envelope Ellis had brought, at the familiar slant of Sarah's handwriting across the front. "No," he said quietly. "Sarah would have known they'd come early. She would have planned for it." He stood, moving to the window. "This is my farm, my home. And whatever my wife was, besides a gardener and a wife, she trusted me to be here, right now." Ellis studied him for a long moment, then nodded sharply. "Jenkins, full perimeter. Carson, get me a satellite link. Mr. Miller." She held out the envelope. "I suggest you read quickly. Your wife's last mission is about to begin." Thomas took the envelope, feeling its weight, the weight of secrets, of trust, of a love that had been deeper and more complex than he'd ever known. Outside, the sun was rising fully now, painting the oak tree in shades of gold. Sarah had chosen this place, chosen him. Now he would find out why. The envelope contained a single photograph and a handwritten letter. Thomas's hands trembled as he stared at the image. Sarah, young and serious in a naval uniform, standing before a massive bank of equipment he didn't recognize. The date. Stamp read 1982, the same year they'd bought the farm. "That was taken at the Naval Cryptologic Center," Ellis said softly. "Your wife was part of the team that cracked the Soviet Union's final-generation submarine codes." Thomas traced Sarah's face in the photograph. She looked so different, yet exactly the same. That quiet determination in her eyes, the slight tilt of her chin that always meant she was solving a puzzle. "Read the letter, Mr. Miller," Ellis urged. "We don't have much time." Thomas unfolded the pages, Sarah's familiar handwriting bringing a fresh wave of grief and wonder. "My dearest Thomas, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and the worst has happened. The thing I've feared for 30 years has finally come to pass. I know you must have so many questions, so much anger and confusion. You deserve answers, all of them. But first you need to understand why I chose silence for so long. In 1982, when we bought our farm, I was part of a classified program called Operation Deep Echo. We discovered something in the ocean depths, not just submarine movements, but evidence of a technology that could change the balance of global power. I was one of 3 people who knew the full scope of what we found. Now I'm the only one left. The locket you buried contains coordinates to a submarine carrying that technology. But it's not just any set of numbers. It's encoded in a cipher that only you can help break, because I built it, Tom. Built it from the pieces of our life together. Every anniversary dinner, every Christmas morning, every sunset we watched from the porch. They're all part of the key. Thomas looked up at Ellis. "This can't be real." "It's very real," Ellis replied, her attention divided between him and the updates coming through her earpiece. "The foreign vehicles have stopped at the property line. 8 individuals, heavily armed. They're waiting for something." Thomas returned to the letter. "The farm map in your pocket. Those aren't random markings. They're dates, Tom. Every significant moment of our marriage translated into coordinates. The garden journal, my quilting patterns, even the way I arranged my herb garden. They're all part of a code that only someone who lived our life would understand. I couldn't tell you because knowing would have put you in danger. But I could. Build you into the solution. Every habit, every tradition we created together, I wove them into an unbreakable cipher. Because love, real love, is the one thing that can't be faked or tortured out of someone. It has to be lived. The Navy will try to decode the information themselves. They'll fail. The foreign agents watching our farm will try to force the solution. They'll fail too, because the only way to find that submarine is to understand how much I loved you and why I chose to spend 40 years pretending to be just a farmer's wife. Look under the floorboards in my sewing room. Behind my quilting frame, you'll find a hidden compartment. Inside is everything you need to understand what comes next. But Tom, my love, be careful. Not everyone in a uniform is on the right side of this fight." The letter ended with a series of numbers that meant nothing to Thomas, but made Ellis inhale sharply when she saw them. "Those are authentication codes," she said. High-level ones. This is bigger than we thought. She turned to one of her officers. Get me a secure line to command. But Thomas was already moving, heading for the stairs. Behind him, he heard Ellis, barking orders. Stay with him and get me updates on those vehicles. I want to know the second they move. The sewing room was exactly as Sarah had left it. Her quilting frame still held her last unfinished project, a complex pattern of stars and circles that Thomas now realized probably wasn't just decorative. He ran his hands along the floorboards, feeling for any irregularity. There, a slight gap, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. The hidden compartment opened with a soft click, revealing a stack of folders, a small tablet computer, and something that made Thomas's breath catch. A framed photo of their wedding day, with Sarah's handwriting across the back. The cipher begins. Here, she'd written, with the moment I chose love over duty and found a way to keep both. Outside, car doors slammed. Footsteps crunched on gravel. And Thomas Miller, who had woken up this morning as a grieving farmer, sat surrounded by his wife's secrets and realized that the true meaning of 40 years of marriage was about to be tested in ways he never could have imagined. Commander Ellis burst into the sewing room, her composure slipping for the first time. We've got movement on the south perimeter. Did you find... She stopped, seeing the open compartment and scattered documents. Thomas held up a letter he'd just started reading. She knew they were coming, not just the Navy, the others too. Listen to this. When the wolves circle the farm, remember 3 things. First, the oak tree is a diversion. Second, trust the patterns, not the people. Third, look to where we first danced. Ellis's radio crackled. Commander, they've breached the outer fence line. How many? 4 teams, moving in coordinated patterns. Professional, not local. Thomas was already moving, heading for the kitchen. Ellis followed, 2 armed officers falling in behind them. Mr. Miller, we need to get you to a secure location. No, Thomas said, reaching the kitchen. We need to dance. He stopped at a seemingly random spot on the worn linoleum floor. Right here. Our first night in the house. Sarah insisted we dance. Right here before we unpacked a single box. He knelt down, running his fingers along the baseboard. She said something that night, that the best hiding places are the ones you visit every day. His fingers found a slight ridge. The baseboard clicked, then swung open, revealing a narrow space containing a sealed envelope and what looked like an old shortwave radio. It's a specialized communication set, Ellis said, eyes widening. Cold War era, but modified. Your wife was sending messages right under everyone's nose. The radio's display suddenly lit up, numbers scrolling across its face. Ellis grabbed her own radio. I want signals tracking on all frequencies now. But Thomas was focused on the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Sarah's handwriting. The garden holds the first key, not the plants themselves, the spaces between them. Remember how I always insisted the rows had to be exactly 3 feet apart? Measure the variations. They'll tell you where to look next, but be careful, my love. By now, they'll have someone inside the Navy team. Trust no one who doesn't know our stories. And whatever you do, don't let them take you off the farm. Everything you need is here. Everything I built for 40 years leads to this moment. P.S. The radio will receive one message. When it comes, you'll know it's me. Outside, they heard. The first shouts, commands in a foreign language. Ellis's team was spreading out, taking defensive positions. Your wife, Ellis said, studying the radio's scrolling display. She wasn't just any codebreaker, was she? She was Ghost Echo. Thomas looked up sharply. What? A legend in naval intelligence. An analyst who could create unbreakable ciphers by weaving them into everyday life. No one ever knew who it was. Ellis's voice held newfound respect. She didn't just hide codes in your life together. She invented an entirely new way of encrypting intelligence. More shouts outside. The sound of breaking glass. We need to move, Ellis insisted. That radio isn't going to help us if... The device suddenly crackled to life. A series of beeps and tones filled the kitchen, followed by a voice that made Thomas's heart stop. "Hello, my love." Sarah's recorded voice, calm and clear. "If you're hearing this, then the garden told you where to look. Now comes the hard part. Remember the quilt I never finished? The one with the star pattern? It's not just a pattern, it's a map. But to read it, you'll need the transmission cut off in a burst of static. Through the windows, they could see figures moving in the pre-dawn darkness, converging on the house. Ellis raised her radio. "All units, defensive positions, protect the house at all costs." To Thomas, she said, "The quilt. Where is it?" But Thomas was staring at the farm map from his pocket, then at the radio's now dark display. She said, "Trust the patterns, not the people." He looked up at Ellis. "Before I show you anything else, tell me something only someone who's read her full file would know. What was Ghost Echo's first successful cipher based on?" Ellis hesitated for a fraction of a second. "The rotation of crop plantings in—" "Wrong." Thomas backed away. The radio clutched to his chest. "Sarah never used crops. She thought it was too obvious. She used cloud patterns." Ellis's expression hardened. She reached for her sidearm, but Thomas was already moving, hitting the hidden switch Sarah had shown him in her letter. The kitchen floor dropped away beneath Ellis, revealing a steep slide into darkness. As she fell, Thomas heard Sarah's voice in his memory. "The best security system is the one that looks like hospitality." He sealed the trapdoor and ran for the stairs. Somewhere in this house, in the life they'd built together, Sarah had left him a way to finish her mission. All he had to do was understand 40 years of love letters written in code. The old farmhouse had never felt so alive. Every creak, every shadow held new meaning as Thomas raced up the stairs, Sarah's shortwave radio tucked securely under his arm. Behind him, he could hear pounding on the trap door. Ellis wouldn't. "Stay contained for long. Clear the building," a voice shouted from outside, accent distinctly Eastern European. Flashlight beams swept across windows. The sound of boots on the porch. Thomas reached the sewing room just as the first window shattered downstairs. Sarah's unfinished quilt still hung on its frame, the star pattern now seeming to pulse with hidden meaning. He grabbed it, along with the stack of documents from the hidden compartment. A young Navy officer, Lieutenant Carson, he remembered, appeared in the doorway, weapon drawn. "Mr. Miller, Commander Ellis is exactly who Sarah warned me about," Thomas cut him off. "Ghost Echo's first cipher used cloud patterns. Any real naval intelligence officer would know that." Carson lowered his weapon slightly. "The farm's surrounded. Sir, we've got at least 3 hostile teams converging, and now our own commander." He shook his head. "What do we do?" Thomas was already moving to Sarah's sewing cabinet. "We follow the patterns." He pulled out drawer after drawer until he found it. An old leather case containing what looked like ham radio equipment. "Emergency. Back up," he explained, setting it up quickly. "Sarah insisted we keep it maintained, said it was for tornado warnings." His laugh was hollow. 40 years of marriage, and I'm just now understanding our emergency preparedness wasn't about weather. The radio crackled to life, displaying a series of numbers that matched a sequence on the quilt's pattern. Carson's eyes widened. "That's a tactical frequency. Secure channel." Thomas nodded. "Sarah didn't just leave us codes. She left us a command center." Downstairs, the sound of splintering wood. Multiple footsteps. Someone shouted in Russian. Carson spoke urgently into his radio. "All loyal units, fall back to secondary positions. Authentication code. Sierra 9. Wait," Thomas interrupted. He pointed to a series of symbols embroidered into the quilt's border. "Use these numbers instead. If Sarah left us a command center, she left us authentication codes too." The young officer quickly relayed the new sequence. Almost immediately, replies came back. 4 teams, all positioned around the farm's perimeter, awaiting orders. "At least we know who's still on our side," Carson said. Then, Sir, movement on the stairs. Thomas was already pulling up the corner of the braided rug, revealing a metal handle set into the floor. Sarah said the best defense is the one that looks like home decoration. He yanked the handle, opening a narrow hatch. Quick! They descended into darkness just as Boots reached the top of the stairs. The hatch closed silently above them, its underside padded to muffle any sound. Motion-activated lights flickered on, revealing a small room filled with monitors, radio equipment, and what looked like decades of surveillance gear, all disguised as ordinary farm equipment when viewed from outside. "Your wife," Carson breathed. "She built all this?" "No," Thomas said, studying a bank of switches labeled in Sarah's neat handwriting. "We built it together. Every renovation, every home, improvements project." His voice caught. "I just didn't know what we were really building." The monitors showed multiple angles of the farm, the oak tree, the barn, the various outbuildings. Foreign agents were moving in coordinated patterns, while Navy teams held defensive positions. And there, emerging from the kitchen's hidden tunnel into the barn, was Ellis, already barking orders into her radio. "She'll try to secure the locket first," Thomas said, but Sarah said that was a diversion. He turned to the quilt, now spread across a table. The star pattern was more than decoration. It was a map of the entire farm, with subtle variations in the stitching indicating something. Carson was checking the radio equipment. "Sir, we're picking up encrypted transmissions. Multiple sources. Can you decode them?" Not without the proper. Carson stopped as Thomas held up Sarah's wedding ring, removed from her jewelry box before the funeral. Sarah always said her wedding ring was the key to everything. Thomas turned it in the light, revealing tiny numbers etched into the band's inner surface. "Let's see what else my wife built into our marriage." Above them, Boots crossed the floor. Orders were shouted in multiple languages. And somewhere on this farm, buried in 40 years of shared life and hidden preparation, lay the real secret Sarah had deemed worth dying to protect. Thomas fed the numbers from the ring into the decryption unit. "Sarah always told me that love was about building something together." He looked at the young officer. "I don't think she was just talking about a marriage." The monitors flickered with new data as the ring's code began its work. The siege of Miller Farm was about to enter its next phase, and Thomas was finally ready to read the love letters his wife had been writing in code for 4 decades. The wedding album sat open on the command center's desk, its pages casting long shadows in the dim light. Thomas turned each page slowly, seeing their life together with new eyes. Every photo held potential meaning now, every captured moment a possible piece of Sarah's puzzle. "Look at this," he said to Carson, who was monitoring the radio frequencies. "Our honeymoon in Bar Harbor. Sarah insisted on taking photos at exact times each day, said it was about capturing the light." He traced the series of images, Sarah on the beach at dawn, noon, sunset. "But look at the positions she's standing in." Carson leaned closer. "Their coordinates. She's coding longitude and latitude into tourist photos. 38 years ago." Thomas shook his head. She was already building it right from the start. Above them, Boots crossed the floor again. The monitors showed Ellis organizing search. Teams, her true allegiance now clear as she coordinated with the foreign agents. They were conducting a methodical sweep of the property, closing in on the oak tree. "Let them dig," Thomas murmured, turning another page. Sarah said it was a diversion. The next photo stopped him cold. Their 5th anniversary dinner. Sarah had arranged everything perfectly that night. The candles, the place settings, the exact angle of their chairs. He'd thought it was just her attention to detail, her love of making moments special. "The angles," he said suddenly. "Lieutenant, can you bring up a nautical chart of the North Atlantic?" Carson's fingers flew over the keyboard. "What are we looking for?" "Sarah always set our anniversary dinner tables the same way. Said it was tradition." Thomas pulled out more photos from different years, laying them side by side. "Look at how the plates are positioned, how the candles are placed. They're not random. They're Submarine routes, Carson breathed. She was tracking patrol patterns through dinner settings. The radio crackled. One of the loyal Navy teams reporting movement near the barn. Thomas glanced at the monitors, then back at the album. He turned to their 20th anniversary, the garden party Sarah had insisted on hosting. She invited specific guests each year, he said, memories clicking into place. Always arranged the seating just so. Said it was about social dynamics, keeping the right conversations flowing. His finger traced the pattern of chairs in the photo. But look, if you overlay this with the nautical chart... Carson nodded. Key naval bases. The guests represented different strategic points. He looked at Thomas with growing amazement. Your wife didn't just create codes. She lived them, breathed them, turned your entire life together into one. Massive encrypted database. Thomas turned another page, and his heart caught. Sarah in her favorite reading chair, surrounded by her quilting supplies. He remembered taking this photo, how she'd asked him to get the angle just right. She was ready for this, he said softly. All of it. Every detail of our life together wasn't just love, it was preparation, insurance. He looked up at the monitors, where Ellis's teams were now excavating around the oak tree. She knew someday someone would betray the project, knew the submarine technology would be threatened, so she built a backup plan into our marriage. The wedding rings decryption sequence was still running, numbers scrolling across screens. Each new layer revealed more patterns, more connections. Their life together had been real. Thomas felt that in his bones, but it had also been something else. A living code, a love letter, written in classified intelligence and emergency protocols. Carson checked another monitor. Sir, they're getting close to the Locket. Good. Thomas closed the album gently, because now we know where to look for what really matters. He stood, newfound purpose in his movements. Sarah didn't hide the truth under the oak tree. She hid it in plain sight, in our love story. He moved to the command console, Sarah's ring glinting on its decryption pad. Lieutenant, get ready to transmit to all loyal units. We're going to show them why Sarah always said the best security isn't about hiding things. He smiled, remembering her voice. It's about making the truth look like something else entirely. Above them, the first shouts of discovery echoed across the farm as Ellis's team found the buried locket. But Thomas wasn't worried anymore. Sarah had spent 40 years preparing for this moment, encoding their love into something unbreakable. Now it was time to use it. The command center hummed with urgency as Thomas spread Sarah's garden journal across the desk. Its pages were filled with what appeared to be routine notes about planting schedules, soil conditions, and crop rotations. But now, with Sarah's ring providing the key, new patterns emerged. Look at this, Thomas said, pointing to a series of entries. Every spring, she'd record the exact distance between plantings, not just rough measurements, down to the quarter inch. Carson leaned in, his military training giving way to genuine wonder. These aren't measurements, they're frequencies, radio frequencies. Through the monitors, they watched Ellis's team excavate the locket, their movements becoming more frantic as they realized what they'd found was just a simple piece of jewelry, not the intelligence payload they'd expected. Sarah's note said the garden holds the first key, Thomas murmured, flipping through more pages, not the plants themselves, but the spaces between. He stopped suddenly. Wait, the herb garden. He pulled up the property surveillance feed, zooming in on the small plot near the kitchen door. Sarah had insisted on planting it in a peculiar pattern, concentric circles that she claimed helped with drainage. Lieutenant, can you overlay a sonar mapping grid on this image? Carson's fingers flew over the keyboard. The herb garden's pattern suddenly transformed into something else entirely, a perfect match for deep ocean topography. It's a seafloor map, Carson breathed. She turned her herb garden into a bathymetric chart. The radio crackled with Ellis's voice, her frustration clear even through the static. The locket's empty. Sweep the entire property. They have to have hidden it somewhere. Thomas smiled, remembering Sarah's words. The best hiding place is one that isn't hiding at all. He turned to the journal's final pages, where Sarah had meticulously recorded the growth of her last spring flowers. These numbers here? They're not plant heights. He pointed to a column of measurements, their depth readings, and these dates, he checked them against the nautical chart still displayed on the monitor, they track something moving, something deep. Carson overlaid the data points. A submarine. She was tracking its course through her gardening notes. He looked at Thomas with newfound respect. Your wife wasn't just encoding intelligence. She was actively monitoring classified operations from your backyard. Above them, the sounds of the search intensified. Ellis's voice again. Check every building, every room, and find Miller. He has to know more than he's telling. Thomas barely heard her. He was lost in the journal's pages, in Sarah's familiar handwriting. Every entry now read like an intimate message meant just for him, a love letter written in the language of classified intelligence. Here, he said suddenly, pointing to a series of annotations about soil pH levels. These variations, they're not about gardening. They're encrypted coordinates. He looked up at the monitors. She wasn't just tracking the submarine. She was tracking everyone tracking the submarine. Carson ran the numbers through the decryption matrix. Multiple hostile vessels, sleeper agents in key ports. His eyes widened. Sir, this isn't just about one submarine. Your wife was mapping an entire covert network. The wedding ring's decryption sequence suddenly chimed, completing its analysis. New data flooded the screens, years of carefully gathered intelligence, all hidden in the daily rhythms of a farmer's wife's routines. That's why they want it so badly, Thomas said softly. Sarah didn't just know where the submarine was. She knew who was hunting it, who was compromised. He looked at the ring, still sitting in its decryption cradle. And she made sure only someone who knew our love story could put the pieces together. Carson checked the perimeter feeds. There, expanding the search pattern. We don't have much time. But Thomas was already turning to the final page of the journal. There, in Sarah's last entry, written just days before her death, was a single line. Remember our first dance, my love. The steps are the same, but the music has changed. He looked up at Carson. Get ready to move. I know where she hid the real intelligence. He smiled, remembering that first night in the farmhouse, Sarah insisting they dance in the kitchen before unpacking. And more importantly, I know why she chose this place to make her last stand. Outside, the morning sun was climbing higher, illuminating the farm Sarah had turned into, both their home and her life's work. It was time to show their enemies why she'd always said love was the hardest code to break, because it was the only one that could break back. The farmhouse kitchen had always been the heart of their home. Now, as Thomas knelt on the worn linoleum where he and Sarah had danced that first night, he saw it with new eyes. The floor pattern wasn't random. It was a map. The tiles, he murmured, tracing the subtle variations in color. She insisted on laying them herself, said it had to be perfect. He looked up at Carson. Help me count the spaces between the darker squares. Together, they mapped the pattern. Carson quickly recognized it. These are tunnel coordinates, standard Cold War bunker notation. He stared at Thomas. Your basement isn't just a basement. Thomas moved to the pantry, pulling out the heavy shelving unit with practiced ease. Behind it, a seam in the wall became visible. Sarah's tornado shelter improvements went on for years. I helped her build them. His voice caught. Never knew I was helping construct a CIA fallback point. The hidden door opened silently on well-oiled hinges, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. Emergency lights flickered on automatically, illuminating walls of concrete and steel. We need to move, Carson said urgently, checking the monitors on his tactical pad. Ellis's team is sweeping the house room by room. They descended quickly, closing the door behind them. The tunnel opened into a large chamber filled with vintage communications equipment, filing cabinets, and maps covering the walls. Everything was meticulously maintained, despite some of the technology dating back decades. "Sarah's real office," Thomas said softly, running his hand along a desk that could have belonged in any 1960s government building. "She spent so many nights down here, said she was organizing her craft supplies." Carson was already checking the equipment. "This is all still active, running on its own power source." He pointed to a modern server bank humming quietly in the corner. "She kept upgrading it. That's current-gen hardware." Thomas moved to a filing cabinet, using Sarah's ring as a key. Inside, folders contained what looked like routine farm documents, equipment maintenance logs, crop yield reports, weather data. But he knew better now. "Everything's coded," he said, pulling out a thick file. 40 years of intelligence gathering, hidden in plain sight as agricultural records." A sound from above made them both freeze. Footsteps in the kitchen. Carson checked his tablet. "They're right over us, but they haven't found the entrance yet." Thomas barely heard him. He was staring at a map on the wall, one that showed the complete tunnel system beneath the farm. It branched out in all directions, connecting to every major building on the property. And there, in Sarah's precise handwriting, notes about recent activity. "She was still using these tunnels," he said. "Right up until—" He stopped, seeing the dates. "These marks are from after she got sick. She was down here 3 days before she died." The map showed a final addition, a new tunnel leading to a chamber beneath the oak tree. But unlike the other passages, this one was marked with a warning. "Last resort only." Carson pointed to a blinking light on an old control panel. "Sir, we've got movement in the tunnel system, multiple heat signatures." He checked his tablet again. "They're not all Ellis's people. Some of these readings, they've been down here for days." "Waiting," Thomas finished. "Sarah knew they were here, knew they'd found part of her network." He turned to another cabinet, this one secured with a digital keypad. "She left a note in her medical records. Said if anything happened to her, I should check her old recipe box. Inside was a birthday card she'd given me in 1985. The message," he punched in a series of numbers, "was our first kiss converted to digits." The cabinet opened with a hiss of preserved air. Inside was a single folder labeled "Contingency" and a small device that looked like a vintage calculator. "It's a field decoder," Carson said, eyes wide. "Cold War era, unbreakable if you don't have the right key sequence." He looked at Thomas. "Which would be—" "Our love story," Thomas nodded, already entering dates. "First dance, first kiss, the day he proposed. Their wedding, the birth of their daughter. Every milestone that had meant something to them became part of the unlock sequence." The device hummed to life, its small screen displaying a message that made Carson inhale sharply. "Ghost Echo Protocol activated." More footsteps above. The sound of furniture being moved. "They'll find the entrance soon," Carson warned. Thomas opened the contingency folder, reading Sarah's final instructions. His face hardened with determination. "Let them come," he said quietly. "Sarah didn't build this place to keep people out." He looked up at the maze of tunnels shown on the wall map. "She built it to lead them exactly where she wanted them to go." The bunker's emergency lights cast long shadows as Thomas Miller prepared to spring his wife's final trap. Above them, the hunt continued. But down here, in the heart of Sarah's secret world, a different kind of war was about to begin. The bunker's old printer whirred to life, spitting out a partially burned document that made Carson step back in shock. "Sir, you need to see this." Thomas took the paper, recognizing Sarah's handwriting in the margins. It was a classified Navy memo dated just 2 weeks before her death, detailing the submarine's mission. But Sarah's annotations told a different story. Project Deep Echo wasn't compromised recently, Thomas said, reading her notes. It was compromised from the start. A hidden door at the far end of the bunker slid open. 3 Navy officers entered, weapons drawn. Lieutenant Wong, who'd been coordinating the perimeter defense, led them. "That's far enough, Mr. Miller," Wong said. "The document, please." Carson raised his weapon, but Thomas touched his arm. Sarah's note said to expect this. "Look at their insignias." The young officer's eyes widened slightly. The insignias were wrong, subtly but wrong, just as Sarah had detailed in her contingency file. "They're not Navy," Thomas said quietly. "They're wearing Navy uniforms, but the details—" Sarah taught me what to look for, just like she taught me to really look at her garden patterns, her quilting designs. He smiled sadly. "My wife spent 40 years teaching me to spot things that didn't quite fit." Wong's expression hardened. "The document, now. You've been down here for days," Thomas continued, backing slowly toward Sarah's desk. "Waiting, using these tunnels, thinking you found Sarah's whole network." He reached behind him, fingers finding the hidden switch exactly where Sarah's notes said it would be. "But you found what she wanted you to find." "Last warning," Wong barked. "The submarine. Data? All of it now." Thomas pressed the switch. Hidden panels in the ceiling dropped, releasing a cascade of papers, thousands of them filling the air like snow. Farm records, garden journals, quilting patterns, family photos, all swirling in the emergency lighting. "Sarah said you'd want everything," Thomas said, as the false Navy team scrambled to gather the falling documents. "She said men like you always want everything." Carson understood instantly, using the confusion to edge toward the secondary exit Sarah had marked in her files. But Wong was faster, firing a warning shot that sparked off the concrete wall. "Enough games!" he shouted over the settling papers. "Where is the real intelligence?" Thomas stood very still, Sarah's voice clear in his memory. "When they show their true faces, show them ours." "The real intelligence?" He gestured at the scattered documents. "It's all real intelligence. Every grocery list, every garden note, every birthday card. Sarah wove the truth through all of it. Fragments, pieces, spread across 40 years of our life together." His voice hardened. "And you'll never decode it without understanding the love story it's written in." Wong's face contorted with rage. He stepped forward, weapon aimed at Thomas's chest. "You're going to help us decode it, all of it." "No," Thomas said simply. "I'm not." The bunker's lights suddenly shifted to red. A klaxon sounded somewhere deep in the tunnel system. "Ghost Echo Protocol Stage 2 initiated," a computerized voice announced. "Containment procedures activated." Heavy blast doors began dropping throughout the tunnel system, the sound echoing through the bunker like distant thunder. Sarah said, "You do this," Thomas continued, as Wong's team looked around in growing panic. "Try to force the answer. Try to steal 40 years of patience in a single night of violence." He shook his head. "But Ghost Echo isn't just a code. It's a love story, and you can't torture a love story into making sense." Wong fired again, but Thomas was already moving, hitting the second switch Sarah had marked. The floor beneath the false Navy team gave way, dropping them into a containment chamber below. "The loyal Navy teams will find them there," Thomas told Carson as they sealed the trap door, "along with enough evidence to prove who they really work for. But the real submarine data—" Carson looked at the scattered papers, the decades of encrypted intelligence. "Is safe," Thomas finished, "because Sarah didn't hide it in any of these documents. She hid it in the one place they'd never think to look." He pulled out their wedding album, opening it to the first page. "She hid it in plain sight, in a story about two people falling in love." The klaxons continued to sound as Thomas began to decode the greatest secret his wife had left him, hidden not in classified files or secret codes, but in the simple, unbreakable cipher of their shared life. The tunnel system was a maze in the dark, emergency lights, casting red shadows that made every corner look like a potential ambush. Thomas led the way, Sarah's wedding album tucked securely under his arm, while Carson covered their rear with his night vision equipment. "How did she build all this?" Carson whispered as they passed another reinforced chamber filled with vintage communications gear. "The resources needed, one piece at a time," Thomas replied, his fingers trailing along the wall until they found a subtle marker, a small heart carved into the concrete. Every anniversary, she'd asked for some home improvement project, underground storage for tornado, safety, root cellars for her garden, wine cellar renovations. He smiled in the darkness. "I helped dig most of these tunnels myself." A distant explosion echoed through the passages. Carson checked his tactical pad. Ellis's team just breached the north entrance. "They're flowing in like water." "Good." Thomas turned at the heart marking. "Sarah said they would. Said people like that always take the obvious route." They emerged into a larger chamber that made Carson stop short. The walls were lined with sophisticated surveillance equipment, all humming quietly. Dozens of screens showed different areas of the farm, the house, the surrounding roads. But it was the central table that drew their attention, a scale model of the entire property, every building, every tree, rendered in perfect detail. "Sarah's dollhouse project," Thomas said softly. "She spent 5 years on it. Said it helped." Relax." He pointed to tiny lights blinking within the model. "Those are the real-time positions of everyone on the property." Carson studied the display. "They're all moving exactly where she predicted they would. The tunnel breaches, the search patterns." He looked at Thomas. "Your wife didn't just leave us a defense plan. She choreographed their entire assault." "Of course she did." Thomas opened the wedding album to a photo of their first dance. "Sarah always said life was like a dance. If you know the steps." He traced the pattern of their movements in the photo, then looked at the model. "You can predict where your partner will go." Suddenly the lights in the chamber flickered. "Adi." New alarm sounded different from the others. "Underwater approach detected," the computerized system announced. "Multiple vessels entering exclusion zone." Carson rushed to one of the surveillance stations. "Submarine signatures. 3, no, 4 of them. Small attack craft." He turned to Thomas. "They're not just coming for the intelligence anymore. They're bringing in extraction teams." Thomas was already moving to a heavy steel door marked with another heart. "Sarah said they'd try this too. Try to overwhelm us with force." He placed his hand on a seemingly blank wall panel. "That's why she built in one last surprise." The panel glowed briefly, scanning his palm print. The door opened with a hiss of hydraulics, revealing a room that looked like it had been teleported straight from the Cold War. Banks of radio equipment, code machines, and in the center, a single red telephone. "It's time to call the submarine," Thomas said, lifting the receiver. "What submarine?" Carson asked. "The missing one?" "No." Thomas smiled, remembering Sarah's last words about trust and timing. "The one that's been waiting 40 years for this call." He dialed a sequence of numbers. Taken from their wedding date, their anniversary, the day they first met. The phone rang once, twice. A crisp voice answered. "Ghost Echo Control, authenticate." Thomas opened the wedding album to their first kiss. The moment captured forever in black and white. In the photo's border, barely visible, was a series of numbers. Authentication code, Thomas read carefully. "True love never dies." There was a pause, then, "Ghost Echo sleeper cell activated. Stand by for direct contact." The chamber's main screen lit up with a new image. A submarine, massive and dark, rising from the depths just offshore. It had been there all along, hidden in plain sight, just like everything else in Sarah's world. Sarah didn't just plan for them finding her intelligence, Thomas told Carson as the screen filled with tactical data. She planned for them trying to steal it, and she made sure we'd have backup when they did. Through the tunnels, they could hear Ellis's teams getting closer, but Thomas wasn't worried anymore. Sarah had taught him the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the best way to protect something isn't to hide it, but to make sure it's protected by something even more powerful than secrets. Love, after all, had always been Sarah's favorite weapon. The surveillance room's main screen filled with classified submarine schematics as a new voice crackled over the secured channel. Ghost Echo Station. This is Captain Reynolds of the USS Phantom. We've maintained silent running for 40 years. Under Protocol 7, awaiting final confirmation. Thomas studied the schematics, recognition dawning. The missing submarine, it's not missing at all, is it? No, sir, Carson said, checking the tactical data streaming across his pad. It's a trap. The whole thing is a trap, the captain's voice continued. Mrs. Miller informed us this day would come, that someone would try to steal Project Deep Echo's core technology, that they'd think they were chasing a missing submarine, when in fact they were being led into a net, Thomas finished, seeing it all clearly now. Sarah didn't just track submarines. She helped design a way to catch them. More tactical data flooded the screens. The 4 approaching enemy submarines were now clearly visible, their positions matching exactly the pattern Sarah had quilted into their anniversary blanket. Years ago, your wife, Carson breathed. She turned the entire eastern seaboard into a giant mesh. The missing submarine is just bait. While they're looking for it, we're looking at them. Thomas opened the wedding album again, finding the photo of their 20th anniversary cruise. Every vacation we took near the coast, every beach we visited. She was mapping their hidden routes, their secret ports. The surveillance system pinged with new alerts. Ellis's team had reached the outer chamber, and more forces were approaching from the water. They were about to be caught between 2 fronts. Captain Reynolds' voice returned. Mr. Miller, we need the final activation code. Mrs. Miller said you'd know it when the time came. Something about your first dance. Thomas closed his eyes, remembering that night in their kitchen. Sarah had insisted on a specific song, had guided him through specific steps. At the time, he'd thought she was just being romantic. The steps, he said suddenly, opening his eyes. Lieutenant, help me with this model. He moved to the scale. Replica of the farm, pointing to markers Sarah had placed years ago. Our dance steps that night, they weren't random. Look at the pattern. Carson overlaid the dance pattern onto the tactical map. It matches the submarine nets, the invisible barrier system she helped design. He looked at Thomas. Your first dance was the activation sequence. Thomas lifted the radio. Captain, the code is box step under stars, turn beneath autumn moon, dip as leaves fall. There was a moment of silence, then, confirmed. Ghost Echo net activating. The tactical display transformed. Hidden sensors all along the coast lit up, revealing a massive underwater detection grid. The 4 approaching enemy submarines were suddenly exposed, caught in a web decades in the making. Sarah waited 40 years for this, Thomas said softly, building the net piece by piece, hiding it in plain sight. Every family vacation, every coastal drive, was a mapping mission, Carson finished. She wasn't just gathering intelligence, she was creating the perfect trap. The door to the outer chamber burst open. Ellis led her team in, weapon raised. It's over, Miller! The submarine data, now! But Thomas just smiled, holding up the wedding album. You're right, it is over, but not the way you think. The tactical display chimed. The enemy submarines were now completely surrounded by U.S. Navy forces that had been hiding in wait, their positions marked by the very coordinates Sarah had spent decades encoding into their family photos. Ghost Echo net complete, Captain. Reynolds reported, all hostile vessels contained. 40 years of patience paid off in full. Ellis's face contorted as she realized the truth. The missing submarine was never missing, Thomas said. Just like Sarah's real mission was never really hidden. It was here all along, woven into our love story. He touched the wedding album gently. She used to say that true love was about building something together. She just never mentioned she was building a trap for people like you. The room filled with the sound of orders being issued, of submarines being captured, of a decades-long operation finally bearing fruit. Sarah's last mission wasn't about hiding intelligence or protecting secrets. It was about using love itself as the perfect weapon, because love, real love, was the one thing her enemies could never fully understand or infiltrate. And in the end, that made all the difference. The command center's speakers crackled with static before Sarah's voice filled the room, as clear and warm as if she were standing there. "Hello, my love. If you're hearing this, then everything has happened exactly as I predicted. The net is active, the enemy is contained, and you've finally learned what I've been building all these years." Ellis and her team froze at the sound. Thomas closed his eyes, letting his wife's voice wash over him. "But there's one more thing you need to know," Sarah's recording continued. "One final truth I couldn't tell you until now." A hidden panel slid open in Sarah's desk, revealing a small tape recorder and a sealed envelope with, "For Thomas, the real mission," written in her handwriting. Project Deep Echo was never just about submarines or surveillance nets, Sarah's voice explained. Those were important, yes, but they were also a cover for something far more crucial, something I could only trust to someone who understood love the way you do. Thomas opened the envelope with trembling fingers, finding a single photograph inside. It showed Sarah at their kitchen table, working on her beloved crossword puzzles. But now he noticed something he'd never seen before, the subtle positioning of her pencil, the seemingly random letters. The submarines were hunting something. Sarah's voice continued, "Something lost during the Cold War, a device that could change everything." But what they never understood was that finding it wasn't the challenge. Keeping it safe was, and the only way to keep something that powerful safe was to hide it in the last place anyone would look, in a love story. Carson studied the photograph. The crossword puzzles, their coordinates, but not for submarines. "No," Thomas said softly, understanding at last. "They're star charts." He looked up at the tactical display, where the submarine net now revealed a larger pattern. Sarah wasn't just tracking submarines. She was tracking something in orbit. "The device they're all looking for?" Sarah's voice held a smile. "It's been up there for 40 years, hidden in plain sight. Every satellite launch I consulted on, every space program I analyzed, I was building a shield, piece by piece. The submarine net isn't just underwater. It extends up into space itself." Ellis lowered her weapon slowly, realization dawning. Ghost Echo. It's not just a code name. It's a satellite network. "The most sophisticated ever created," Sarah confirmed through the recording, "capable of protecting us from threats we haven't even imagined yet. And now it's complete, activated by the one thing our enemies could never duplicate, a genuine love story lived one day at a time, over 40 patient years." Thomas touched the wedding album, understanding flowing through him like a tide. Every vacation photo that seemed to point at submarines had also been angled skyward. Every garden pattern that tracked underwater movement also mirrored the stars. "Above, the final coordinates are in our story," Sarah's voice softened. "In the real moments, the true ones, the night you proposed, when we danced under the stars, the meteor shower we watched on our honeymoon, the constellations we taught our daughter. Love isn't just the perfect hiding place, it's the perfect activation code." The tactical display shifted, revealing a vast network of satellites, previously invisible, now awakening one by one as they recognized the pattern of Thomas and Sarah's shared life. "Ghost Echo was never about catching spies or protecting secrets," Sarah continued. "It was about building something that could only be controlled by genuine love. Because love, real, patient, everyday love, is the one force our enemies can never truly understand or corrupt." Ellis sank into a chair, her mission dissolving in the face of a truth far larger than she'd imagined. Her team lowered their weapons, rendered irrelevant by Sarah's final revelation. "So now you know, my love." Sarah's voice was thick with emotion. "Why I chose you. Why I built our life the way I did. Every moment we shared wasn't just precious to me as your wife, it was another piece of the strongest security system ever created. Because true love isn't just powerful, it's unbreakable. The recording ended, but Thomas barely noticed. He was looking at their wedding album with new eyes, seeing not just their love story, but the masterpiece Sarah had woven it into. A shield built of genuine moments, protecting not just secrets or submarines, but the very stars above. And Sarah had done more than create an unbreakable code. She'd proven that love itself was the ultimate defense, hidden in plain sight in the story of a farmer and his wife who danced together in their kitchen and built something extraordinary, one ordinary day at a time. The farm's defense plans lay spread across Sarah's desk, each page annotated in her precise handwriting. While Ellis and her team were contained in a secured section of the bunker, Thomas studied the preparations his wife had spent decades perfecting. She turned the entire property into a fortress, Carson said, examining the schematics. Every barn, every silo, every piece of farm equipment, they're all part of the defense grid. Thomas nodded, touching a notation about the old grain silo. Sarah insisted on renovating it 5 years ago, said it needed better ventilation. He smiled faintly. She was installing surveillance equipment and defensive positions. The tactical display showed multiple hostile teams converging on the farm. The submarine net had caught their underwater forces, but land-based operators were still incoming. And they looked professional. Your wife's notes say they'll try a 3-pronged assault, Carson reported, studying Sarah's predictions. Using the tree line for cover, approaching from the east, north, and southwest, Thomas finished. Those are the same directions. Sarah insisted we plant windbreaks 15 years ago. He moved to the property model. The trees aren't just for show. They're channeling the enemy exactly where she wanted them. A warning light flashed on the console. Above them, motion sensors detected vehicles approaching the farm's outer perimeter. Heavy vehicles. They're bringing in serious hardware, Carson warned. Armored transport, tactical gear. But Thomas was already moving to another cabinet, this one concealed behind a panel marked with Sarah's favorite flower design. Inside were detailed instructions for activating the farm's true defensive capabilities. Sarah said farming was about patience, he said, entering codes into the main console, about planting seeds and waiting for them to grow. Across the property, hidden systems began humming to life. She planted quite a few seeds of her own, the irrigation system that Sarah had insisted on upgrading yearly. It could now deliver a sophisticated sensor-blocking compound across key approaches. The solar panels she'd added to every building, they powered a network of electromagnetic disruption devices. The garden shed, Thomas said suddenly, remembering Sarah's insistence on its exact placement. Lieutenant, check the thermal imaging. Carson's eyes widened as the scan revealed what lay beneath the innocent-looking structure. That's a tactical command center, military grade. Sarah always said a good garden needs a good foundation. Thomas entered another code, and the shed's internal systems activated. She built quite a foundation here. The radio crackled with updates from the Navy teams surrounding the captured submarines. The underwater threat was contained, but the land assault was accelerating. Satellite imagery showed multiple teams converging, their movements suggesting serious military training. Your wife's notes say they'll try to breach the house first, Carson said, checking the tactical feeds. Standard protocol for this type of... No, Thomas interrupted, remembering Sarah's words. That's what they want us to think. Check the barn. The thermal scans shifted, revealing heat signatures already inside the old structure. They'd infiltrated while everyone was focused on the house. Sarah said the obvious play is usually a distraction, Thomas explained, moving to activate the barn's hidden defenses. She taught me that during poker nights. Said the real action is always where people aren't looking. Carson studied the enemy positions with growing admiration. They're following the exact patterns she predicted, moving exactly where she wanted them to move. Of course they are. Thomas opened the wedding album to their silver anniversary photo. Hidden in the background was the barn, and now he could see how Sarah had positioned them for the picture, creating a perfect tactical diagram of the coming battle. She spent 40 years studying how they think, how they move, every training manual, every tactical doctrine. She knew them better than they knew themselves, Carson finished. The console chimed with an urgent alert. The hostile teams were in position, preparing for their assault. But Thomas felt an unfamiliar calm settle over him. Sarah had prepared for this moment with the same patience and attention to detail she'd brought to their marriage. Sarah told me once that the best defense isn't about having the biggest walls, he said, initiating the final security protocols. It's about making your opponent walk exactly where you want them to walk, think exactly what you want them to think. The tactical display showed the enemy forces moving into their final positions, unknowingly following a pattern Sarah had quilted into their wedding anniversary blanket decades ago. They think they're laying a trap, Thomas said softly, remembering Sarah's smile when she'd finished that quilt. But they're really just completing a dance my wife choreographed 40 years ago. The farm's hidden defenses hummed with growing power as Thomas Miller prepared to fulfill his wife's final tactical masterpiece. Outside, the enemy prepared for what they thought would be a simple assault on a grieving farmer's home. They were about to learn why Sarah had always said love was the most powerful weapon of all. The first shots came at midnight, precise and coordinated. The attackers hit every floodlight simultaneously, plunging the farm into darkness, or what should have been darkness. Right on schedule, Thomas said, watching the tactical display. Sarah's hidden lighting system activated automatically, bathing the property in invisible infrared that only their sensors could detect. Sarah always said, darkness was just light you weren't prepared to see. Through the command center's monitors, they watched the assault teams advance in textbook formation. Their night vision gear showed them a vulnerable farm. What they couldn't see was the web they were walking into. They're following the exact approach paths she predicted, Carson said, monitoring the thermal signatures. 3 teams moving just like the pattern in our anniversary waltz, Thomas finished. He opened Sarah's emergency protocol manual, its pages filled with tactical instructions disguised as dance steps. Sarah made me practice that dance for weeks, said the rhythm had to be perfect. The first team reached the barn's outer wall. Their breaching charges were already in place when Thomas activated Sarah's first countermeasure. The irrigation system she'd modified sprang to life, spraying a fine mist that seemed to amplify the darkness. The assault team's night vision gear suddenly showed only static, specialized particles in the water, Carson explained, reading Sarah's notes. Disrupts electronic vision systems. He smiled. Your wife turned morning dew into a weapon. The second team was approaching the house when the solar panels activated their secondary function. A low-frequency pulse rippled across the farm, disrupting radio communications and tactical equipment. Sarah's gardening schedule, Thomas said, checking the timing. She wasn't just tracking the sun, she was calculating electromagnetic coverage. Patterns. The third team, the most heavily armed, moved toward the silo. They were halfway across the open ground when Thomas entered the final code from his and Sarah's wedding date. The ground beneath their feet shifted. What looked like ordinary soil became a fluid, non-lethal trap that Sarah had spent years perfecting. The entire team sank to their knees, immobilized. Marriage is about building on solid ground, Thomas quoted, remembering Sarah's words. She never said anything about giving our enemies the same courtesy. But the opposition had planned for resistance. New signatures appeared on the thermal scan, backup teams approaching from unexpected angles. They're adapting, Carson warned, breaking from standard protocols. Good, Thomas said, turning to the property model. Sarah was hoping they'd do that. He pointed to a series of innocent-looking fence posts. She said clever enemies are the easiest to predict. They always think they're the first ones to think outside the box. He activated the fence grid. Concentrated electromagnetic pulses fired in a precise sequence, following a pattern Sarah had worked out decades ago. Every piece of electronic equipment the backup teams carried went dead simultaneously. Through the monitors, they watched the assault devolve into confusion. Each countermeasure Sarah had designed led naturally to the enemy's likely response, which triggered the next trap in her grand design. "The house team is still advancing," Carson reported. "They've switched to basic equipment. No electronics." Thomas nodded, remembering summer evenings on the porch, Sarah insisting they sit in specific spots. "The porch railings," he said. "Check their height." Carson's eyes widened as he understood. "They're exactly at chest level for someone crouching. She built firing positions into everything," Thomas finished. "Every renovation, every repair." He activated the porch defenses. Hidden panels slid into place, transforming the familiar farmhouse into a fortified position. The loyal Navy teams, following Sarah's carefully prepared instructions, moved to take advantage of the defensive architecture she'd spent 40 years perfecting. Each position covered another in interlocking fields of fire, all built into the normal features of a working farm. "They're pulling back," Carson said, watching the thermal signatures retreat, regrouping for a different approach. "No," Thomas said quietly. "They're doing exactly what Sarah wanted. Look at where they're gathering." The tactical display showed the hostile forces consolidating near the oak tree. The same oak tree where this had all started, where Sarah had led them to believe the crucial intelligence was buried. "Your wife," Carson breathed. "She's not just defeating them, she's herding them." Thomas opened the protocol manual to its final page. Sarah's handwriting was soft but clear. "When they're all in position, my love, remember our favorite song, the one we dance to under the stars. Enter the..." Tempo as the final code. He looked up at the tactical display, where dozens of hostile forces were now clustered around the oak tree, preparing for what they thought would be their final push. Sarah always said, "A good dance ends with everyone exactly where they're supposed to be," Thomas said, entering the rhythm of their song into the command console. "Time to show them the last steps." The battle for Miller Farm was about to reach its crescendo, orchestrated by a woman who had spent 40 years preparing for this very night. And like everything else Sarah had built, it would end with love, proving stronger than force. The tunnel system felt different now, charged with purpose as Thomas and Carson made their way toward the oak tree's underground chamber. Above them, thermal imaging showed the hostile forces consolidating their position, unknowingly gathering. Exactly where Sarah had planned. "Your wife left one last set of instructions," Carson said, checking the detonator switch they'd recovered from Sarah's final cache. "But these plans, they're different from the others." Thomas nodded, studying. The hand-drawn map Sarah had left them. Unlike her other diagrams, precise and mathematical, this one was sketched with emotion, personal. The margins were filled with small hearts and intimate notes. "This wasn't written by Ghost Echo," he said softly. "This was written by my wife." They reached a junction where the tunnel split 3 ways. On the wall, Sarah had carved another heart, but this one contained a date, their first kiss. "She's still leading us," Thomas said, turning left. "Even now, she's still teaching me to dance." The passage opened into a circular chamber directly beneath the oak tree. The space was filled with decades of memories, photos, letters, small mementos of their life together, all carefully preserved behind protective panels. "It's a decoy," Carson realized, scanning the room. "Another layer of the trap." "No," Thomas corrected, moving to the center of the chamber. "It's a reminder." He pressed his hand against a sealed panel marked with their wedding date. "Sarah knew what would happen when we activated the final protocol. She wanted me to remember what we were fighting for." The panel slid open, revealing a small safe. Inside was a single envelope and what looked like an old-fashioned detonator. Ghost Echo's last resort, Carson said, checking his tactical display. The charges your wife planted throughout the tunnel system aren't charges at all, Thomas finished, reading Sarah's final letter. They're electromagnetic pulse generators, 40 years of technological development hidden in plain sight. He looked up at the chamber's ceiling, where the hostile forces gathered around the oak tree. Sarah wasn't planning to destroy them. She was planning to save them. Suddenly, Ellis's voice crackled through their radios. Miller, we know you're down there. Your wife's games are over. The technological advantage is lost. We're doing this the old-fashioned way. Thomas pressed the radio transmit button. Sarah said you'd say that. She said people like you always think you can win through force when skill fails. Your wife is dead, Ellis spat, and her precious Ghost Echo satellite network will belong to us. The submarine net, the orbital shield, all of it. We have teams ready to seize control the moment we breach that chamber. No, Thomas said quietly, you don't. He opened the envelope, reading Sarah's final message aloud. My dearest love, by now they'll be telling you it's hopeless, that they've outmaneuvered us, that Ghost Echo will fall, but they've forgotten the most important thing about love. Above them, the hostile forces began their final approach. Breaching charges were set, weapons armed. Love isn't about control, Thomas continued, Sarah's words filling the chamber. It's about trust, about believing in something bigger than yourself. He looked at the detonator, understanding flowing through him. Ghost Echo was never meant to be controlled. It was meant to be set free. Carson's eyes widened as he understood. The satellite network, the submarine net. She built it all to be self-sustaining. Because love, real love, doesn't need constant control, Thomas said, remembering every lesson Sarah had taught him. It just needs to be trusted. Ellis's voice again. Final warning, Miller. Surrender now or... Thomas pressed the detonator. The chamber hummed with sudden energy as Sarah's final protocol activated. Throughout the tunnel system, 40 years of hidden technology surged to life, but instead of destroying, it transformed. The tactical display shifted, showing Ghost Echo's true form emerging. The satellite network, the submarine net, all of it began operating on its own, following protocols Sarah had spent decades perfecting. She didn't build a weapon, Thomas said, watching Sarah's life work fulfill its purpose. She built a guardian, one that could only be awakened by love itself. Above them, the hostile forces' equipment went dark as Ghost Echo's protective field expanded, not destroying their technology, but rendering it harmless. The farm, the surrounding area, then spreading outward, a shield built from 40 years of patience and love. Sarah's voice echoed in Thomas's memory. The greatest power isn't in controlling something, my love. It's in knowing when to let it protect itself. The battle for Miller Farm wasn't ending with destruction, but with understanding. Sarah's final gift to the world wasn't a weapon to be fought over, but a protection that could never be stolen, because it had been built with the one thing their enemies could never understand. Love, after all, had always been Sarah's greatest innovation. Dawn broke over Miller Farm in gentle waves of gold and pink, illuminating a changed world. Thomas stood on the porch, watching as military vehicles departed and naval teams secured the last of the hostile forces. The decoded microfilm from Sarah's Locket lay on the table beside him, its contents finally clear. The president has been briefed, Carson said, approaching with fresh coffee. Ghost Echo's transformation is complete. It's exactly what we needed, and nothing like what anyone expected. Thomas nodded, picking up the microfilm's case. Sarah wrote the truth in here, hidden in plain sight. Not just coordinates or technical specs, but the real purpose of everything she built. Around them, the farm hummed with new life. The satellite network Sarah had created wasn't a weapon to be controlled, but a shield that worked on its own, protecting vulnerable communications, safeguarding crucial systems, all without human intervention. Your wife, Carson said, checking the latest updates on his tablet. She didn't just predict this moment, she shaped it. Every agency that's tried to seize control of Ghost Echo in the last 6 hours has failed. But when they try to work with it to support its protective functions, it responds, Thomas finished, because that's what love does. It protects without controlling, strengthens without dominating. He smiled, remembering Sarah's words. She built it to think the way love thinks. Ellis was led past them in handcuffs, her face a mask of frustrated confusion. It doesn't make sense, she muttered. The technology, the protocols, they should work for anyone. That's where you're wrong, Thomas said quietly. Sarah didn't build Ghost Echo to work for anyone. She built it to work for everyone. He held up the microfilm. That's what these coordinates really mean. Not control points, but connection points. Places where the system could link with others, strengthen them, protect them. The tactical displays showed Ghost Echo's influence spreading, not as a weapon or a tool of control, but as a stabilizing force. Commercial satellites, military systems, civilian networks, all finding themselves subtly protected, their vulnerabilities quietly strengthened. She spent 40 years, Carson said, reviewing the data, building something that could only be activated by love, because love was the only force she trusted to use it correctly. In the distance, the oak tree stood peaceful in the morning light. The ground around it had been restored. Sarah's false trail now serving as a reminder of how misdirection could protect truth. Captain Reynolds' voice came over the secure channel. Ghost Echo integration is at 70% and climbing. We've never seen anything like it. The entire global communications infrastructure is being protected, not controlled, not dominated, just sheltered. Thomas touched his wedding ring, thinking of Sarah's smile when she'd explained why the inscription had to be exactly that length, exactly those words. Everything in their life together had been both exactly what it seemed and something more. Love made manifest in code and protocol. The submarines are being escorted to port, Carson reported. All hostile forces contained. And Ghost Echo, he shook his head in amazement. It's doing exactly what your wife designed it to do. Protecting without controlling, strengthening without dominating. Like love, Thomas said softly. Above them, satellites shifted in their orbits, adjusting to better serve their protective function. Beneath the waves, the submarine net maintained its vigilance, not as a trap, but as a guardian. And throughout the farm, Sarah's decades of preparation stood revealed not as weapons, but as shields. Sir, Carson said, checking one final update. CIA, NSA, and Naval Intelligence are all requesting meetings. They want to understand how Ghost Echo works. Thomas smiled, thinking of all the quiet evenings with Sarah, all the small moments that had seemed so ordinary. Tell them they already know. They just have to remember what love feels like. The morning light strengthened, warming the farm. Sarah had transformed from a simple homestead into the heart of something extraordinary, not a weapon to be fought over, but a gift to be shared. Not a force to control others, but a way to protect everyone. Ghost Echo, like the love that had created it, would keep its own counsel and pursue its own purpose. Not to dominate, but to defend. Not to control, but to connect, just as Sarah had planned all along. 1 year later, Thomas stood before the oak tree, watching as the official memorial was unveiled. The simple bronze plaque read, "Sarah Miller, she protected what mattered most." Below these words was a series of seemingly decorative lines that Thomas knew formed the core code of Ghost Echo's protective protocols. The president wanted something more elaborate, Carson said, now wearing the insignia of a full lieutenant commander. Your wife's work has transformed global security. They wanted to list all her achievements. Thomas shook his head, touching the plaque gently. Sarah would have hated that. She never wanted recognition, she wanted results, and results there were. In the year since Ghost Echo's activation, International tensions had eased as nations found their critical systems mysteriously protected rather than threatened. The age of cyber warfare had given way to an era of digital defense, all guided by protocols Sarah had woven into the fabric of their love story. "The farm looks good," Carson noted, gesturing to the restored buildings. The scars of that night's battle had been erased, but the defenses remained, hidden in plain sight. "Still maintaining her gardens?" "Every day," Thomas said. "The herb spirals still help Ghost Echo track submarine movements. The flower beds are still monitoring satellite positions." He smiled. "Sarah always said a garden needs constant attention. Now I understand she wasn't just talking about plants." They walked to the porch, where Sarah's rocking chair still sat in its precisely calculated position. Thomas had discovered it provided optimal coverage for 3 different surveillance zones, while still being the perfect spot to watch the sunset. "The intelligence community is still trying to understand how she did it," Carson said, accepting. "A glass of lemonade. How she built something so complex into something so simple." "They're overthinking it," Thomas replied. "Sarah didn't hide Ghost Echo in complexity. She hid it in love." He gestured to the farm around them. Every anniversary, dinner, every dance, every quiet moment, they weren't just cover for her work. They were her work. She proved that love itself could be a technology more powerful than any weapon. Inside, the house maintained its dual nature. To visitors, it was simply a well-kept farmhouse. But Thomas knew every family photo still contributed. To Ghost Echo's calculations, every piece of furniture still played its part in the global defense network. "The system's still evolving," Carson reported, "learning, adapting, always protecting but never controlling, just like she designed it." Thomas nodded, remembering Sarah's words. "Love doesn't need to control to be strong. It just needs to be true." A car approached up the long drive, his daughter and grandchildren coming for their weekly visit. They didn't know the full story yet, but they would. Sarah had left instructions about when and how to tell them, encoded naturally in family recipes and holiday traditions. "The memorial ceremony starts in an hour," Carson reminded him. "Half the intelligence community will be here." Sarah would have laughed at that, Thomas said. All those agents and analysts standing in her garden, never realizing they're still being protected by her flowers and fence posts. He touched his wedding ring, the one that had helped unlock Ghost Echo's final protocol. The inscription inside caught the light. "Love protects without possessing." "You know," he said quietly, "Sarah told me once that the greatest security system in the world wouldn't be built with computers or codes. It would be built with love, because love is the only force that creates without destroying, protects without controlling, strengthens without dominating." Above them, satellites shifted in their endless dance, guided by protocols born in quiet moments between a farmer and his wife. Beneath the waves, submarine nets maintained their vigilance, their patterns set by anniversary dinners and garden plantings. And around them the farm continued its dual mission, growing crops and protecting nations, all through the power of a love story 40 years in the making. "She left us more than a defense system," Thomas said, watching his grandchildren run toward the porch. "She left us proof that love isn't just an emotion, it's the most powerful force in the universe. You just have to be patient enough to let it work." The memorial plaque gleamed in the afternoon sun, its hidden code continuing its quiet work. Sarah Miller's greatest creation lived on, not just in the satellites and submarines and secret protocols, but in the daily rhythms of love that had given it life. And on Miller Farm, where every flower and fence post still played its part in protecting the world, Thomas smiled and opened his arms to his grandchildren, knowing that Sarah's true legacy wasn't the technology she'd created, but the love that had made it possible. The end.